Hello. Glad you're here. This story can be simply listened to without trying to remember every detail. It's designed for peace, for silence, and for slowly immersing yourself in the story. If this format appeals to you and you want to see more stories like this, you can support this channel with simple actions. Subscribing, liking, and any comment help these stories find their audience. Over time, thanks to your support, deeper voiceovers, gentle animations, and an even more atmospheric presentation will appear here, but everything takes time. And now you are becoming part of the very beginning of this journey. And now you can just relax. In ancient times, people didn't seek precise answers. It was more important to them to feel that the world around them had meaning. When night fell and silence fell, people began to listen, not only to the sounds of nature, but also to their own thoughts. This is how stories were born. They weren't told for entertainment. Through them, they tried to explain what was otherwise incomprehensible. Why does the sun return every day? Why the sea is sometimes calm, while sometimes it destroys everything in its path? Why does life appear and disappear without asking permission? Myths helped us accept reality. If thunder had a name, then it could be understood. If death had a master, then there was order in the world. Even fear became lessened when it had a history. The ancient Greeks believed that the world did not arise all at once. It emerged gradually, like a thought that initially has no form. They called this initial state chaos. Chaos was not evil. It was the absence of anything definite. Not an empty room, but the emptiness before the room itself appeared. There was no time, no light, and no darkness. And it was from this state that the world began to emerge. The first to emerge from chaos was Gaia, Earth. She was not a goddess in the traditional sense. Gaia did not rule or command. She simply existed. But that was enough. Gaia became the foundation for all life. Mountains could arise upon her. Rivers could flow through her. The first forms of life could emerge within her. Without her, the world would have remained an endless nothingness. From herself, Gaia gave birth to Uranus, sky. It spread over the earth, creating a boundary between that which is below and that which is above. Thus, the first division appeared in the world. Earth and sky united, and from this union, the Titans were born. Ancient beings, personifying the forces of the world. The ocean became endless water. Memory became mnemosine, and time was named Chronos. If you think about it, it is time that has always caused people the most anxiety. It cannot be stopped. It cannot be persuaded. It moves forward, regardless of desire. It is no coincidence that Chronos became one of the key figures in ancient myths. In his image, people saw fear of the future, fear of what cannot be controlled. By the way, if you've ever thought that time controls our lives more than we control ourselves, you can share it in the comments. Sometimes such thoughts unite us more than any words. The history of the Titans was just beginning, and events lay ahead that would forever change the world. Among the Titans, Chronos gradually became the most powerful, not because he was the most powerful, but because he personified time. And time, as the ancients knew, rules everything. Chronos overthrew his father, Uranus, and took his place. Thus, the world witnessed a shift in power for the first time. One generation gave way to the next, though not of its own free will. But with power came fear to Chronos. He had been told that one of his children would do the same to him. Overthrow. Take power. Take his place. And Kronos understood one simple thing. The future cannot be conquered by force, but it can be destroyed beforehand. Every time a child was born, Kronos swallowed it, calmly, without malice. For him, this was not cruelty but calculation. Thus his children disappeared, one by one, and time continued to move forward, as if nothing had happened. Sometimes it seems like this myth is strangely reminiscent of human life. We too often fear the future and try to prevent it. We put off decisions, we avoid change. We hope that this way we can maintain control. If you've ever felt that the future is frightening precisely because it can't be stopped, you're not alone. People have been thinking about this for thousands of years, but even time has its limits. Kronos' wife was Rhea. She watched her children disappear and understood that this order could not last forever. When her youngest son was born, Rhea decided to deceive him. She hid the child away from Kronos and gave her husband a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes instead. Kronos swallowed it, not noticing the substitution. Thus, Zeus was saved. Zeus grew up in hiding, far from power and fear. He was raised by nymphs. The sound of his cries was masked by noise so that Kronos would not suspect anything. Time passed. Zeus grew up and learned the truth. He understood what the world had become under the rule of the Titans, and he realized that fear could not be the basis of order. With the help of the goddess Metis, Zeus forced Kronos to return the swallowed children. One by one, they returned to the world. Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, Hestia. Thus began the war that would later be called the Titanomachy. It lasted for many years. The earth trembled. The sea overflowed its banks. The sky was lit by lightning. This was more than just a battle of forces. It was a clash of the old world with the new. And the outcome of this war was predetermined. The future always finds a way to come. The war between the gods and the Titans lasted a long time. Years passed, and the world seemed unable to decide what its future would be. The Titans were ancient and powerful. They embodied forces that existed long before humans, even before the Olympian gods themselves. But in their world, there was no room for change. Everything was based on fear and submission. Zeus and his brothers brought with them a different order, not ideal or tranquil, but more flexible. A world in which power could shift. A world in which the future was not preemptively destroyed. In the end, the Titans were defeated. They were not completely destroyed. They were imprisoned in the depths of Tartarus, far underground, where they could no longer influence the fate of the world. Kronos fell not because he was weak. He fell because he tried to stop the unstoppable. Time cannot conquer itself. This moment was a turning point. The world no longer belonged solely to the past. It began to move forward. If you think about it, this is a very human story. We too often cling to the familiar, even when it has long since ceased to function, and only change allows something new to emerge. After the victory over the Titans, the world changed. A new era dawned. Zeus and his brothers divided power. The sky went to Zeus. The sea went to Poseidon. The underworld became the domain of Hades. Mount Olympus became the home of the gods. It was inaccessible to humans and hidden from their eyes. Olympus symbolized the order that replaced chaos. But it's important to understand one thing. The gods of Olympus did not become perfect rulers. They were not without mistakes. They were angry, envious, loving, and made mistakes. That's why people saw themselves reflected in them. The gods were stronger, but not wiser in everything. They made the same mistakes as humans, only the consequences were far greater. From this point on, myths cease to be simply stories of creation. They become tales of character, choice, and responsibility. And if you listen closely, it's easy to recognize familiar feelings in these ancient stories. Fear of the future, the desire to control, and the hope that order is, after all, possible. Here, the first chapter ends, but the story of the Olympian gods is just beginning. After defeating the Titans, Zeus became the supreme god, but his power was not simple and unconditional. He did not inherit a world in perfect condition. He inherited a world that was only just beginning to come into order. Zeus ruled the heavens. Thunder and lightning became his symbols. But in myths, they signified more than just power. They were a reminder that power always comes with responsibility. A new generation of gods gathered on Olympus. Each of them was responsible for their own part of the world. But even among the gods, there was no complete agreement. Zeus often intervened in disputes, sometimes fairly, sometimes under the influence of emotion. He could be wise and patient, or he could act impulsively. Frankly, this makes his image surprisingly vivid. The ancient Greeks did not try to imagine an ideal ruler. They preferred a god who makes mistakes but remains responsible. Sometimes it seems that power over the world was not a reward for Zeus, but a test. He maintained balance between the gods, humans, and the forces of nature. And any misstep could lead to chaos. If you think about it, even managing your own life can be difficult. Now imagine having to rule the entire world. Olympus was more than just a place. It was a symbol of order, a mountain hidden from people, where decisions were made that affected the fate of all living things. Each god on Olympus had their purpose and their place in this complex structure. Hera, Zeus's wife, was responsible for marriage and family ties. She protected traditions and order, but she was also known for her jealousy. Her image reminded people that even the desire for order can degenerate into rigidity. Athena appeared in an unusual way. She was born from the head of Zeus. This is how the ancient Greeks demonstrated the connection between wisdom and power. Athena did not seek war for the sake of war. She valued reason and strategy. Artemis was also on Olympus, goddess of nature and silence. She preferred forests and mountains to the noise of palaces. In her image, people saw freedom from rules and expectations. Each of these gods reflected different aspects of human life, and Olympus became more than just the home of the gods. It became a mirror of the human world. Sometimes it's useful to ask yourself, which god would be closest to you? The one who strives for order, or the one who chooses freedom. Poseidon was Zeus's brother and ruler of the seas. His character, like water, was changeable. He could be calm and generous, or he could become destructive and furious. For ancient people, the sea was both a source of life and danger. It nourished, but it also took. Therefore, Poseidon was both respected and feared. He was said to be able to raise a storm with a single movement, or he could allow ships to pass undisturbed if he was pleased. This image clearly reveals man's relationship with nature. We depend on it, but we cannot control it. Poseidon rarely intervened directly in the affairs of Olympus. He preferred to act through the elements. Earthquakes and storms were considered his signs. If you think about it, the sea still evokes similar feelings today. It attracts and terrifies at the same time. And perhaps that is why the myth of Poseidon seems so alive even today. When people looked at the endless water, they understood one simple truth. There are forces that defy all rules, and we have to accept that. Hades, unlike his brothers, did not live on Olympus. He was given the underworld, a world of silence and shadows. Hades was not an evil god. He did not punish or torment. His task was much simpler and stricter, to ensure that order was maintained after death. The ancient Greeks did not imagine the afterlife as a place of eternal suffering. It was more like a continuation of existence, but without strong emotions. There was neither joy nor pain, only peace. People rarely spoke Hades' name out loud, not out of fear, but out of respect. Death was considered part of the natural order. Sometimes it seems that modern man fears this topic far more than the ancients. They accepted the finiteness of life as a fact, and they tried to live their allotted time mindfully. Hades reminded us of a simple rule. Everything has a beginning and an end, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you think about it, it's precisely this understanding that makes life valuable. Apollo was one of the most revered gods of Olympus. He was responsible for light, music, and harmony. His image combined beauty and order. Apollo's music was said to have the power to calm the mind. It helped people find balance and inner peace. In this image, the ancient Greeks saw the power of art, not as entertainment, but as a means of healing. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, often appeared alongside Apollo in myths. Her influence was gentle, yet very powerful. She neither commanded nor forced. People and gods submitted to her voluntarily. Love in myths was rarely calm. It brought joy and sufferings simultaneously. But this is precisely what made it such an important part of life. Sometimes it seems that without love and art, the world would be too harsh. Even the gods needed these powers to maintain balance. If you listen closely, many ancient myths speak to the same things we think today, that life without feelings loses its meaning. Ares represented another side of human nature. He was the god of war and conflict, not strategy and reason, but chaos and rage. Ares was rarely respected. Even among the gods, his image evoked tension. He was a reminder that destruction is always near, and that war rarely brings true victory. Athena was Ares's opposite. She was also associated with war, but in a very different way. For her, reason, planning, and protection were important. Through these gods, The ancient Greeks showed the difference between strength and wisdom, between impulse and conscious choice. Olympus was a complex world. There was no absolute good or evil. Each god reflected a different aspect of life. This is why the myths of the Olympian gods remained alive for so long. In them, people recognized themselves, their fears, their desires, their doubts. And so the second chapter ends. But the story is far from over. The gods of Olympus lived apart from people, but were never completely cut off from them. The ancient Greeks believed that the gods constantly watched over human life, not from above, but as if from within the world itself. People turned to the gods not only in times of danger, they prayed to them before important decisions, before journeys, before wars and holidays, even before an ordinary day. It was believed that each god heard requests related to their sphere. The sea belonged to Poseidon, love and beauty to Aphrodite, wisdom and choice to Athena, and fate after death was under the control of Hades. Sacrifices to the gods were made not out of fear, but out of respect. It was a way to remind others of oneself, a way to show that a person was mindful of powers greater than themselves. Sometimes the gods responded, sometimes they didn't. And this too seemed logical. After all, even the gods didn't intervene without reason. If you think about it, there's something very human about this. We too often wait for signs, hints, confirmation that we've made the right choice. Myths helped us accept uncertainty. They taught us to live in a world where not everything depends on us. Myths about the gods weren't just stories. They became part of everyday life. Through them, people explained successes and failures, illnesses and healings, victories and defeats. If the harvest was good, they thanked Demeter. If the sea was calm, they remembered Poseidon. If the house was kept in order, it was considered a sign of Hera's favor. But if something bad happened, people rarely blamed the gods directly. Rather, they looked for the cause within themselves, in the wrong choice, in the imbalance. Myths taught responsibility. Even if fate is stronger than a person, actions still matter. Interestingly, the gods rarely punished immediately. More often, consequences came over time. Thus, the ancient Greeks showed the connection between actions and results. Sometimes myths sound like a warning. Don't try to cheat the order of the world. Don't put yourself above what you don't fully understand. If you listen closely, these stories haven't become outdated. They've simply changed form. But the questions they ask remain the same. Heroes occupied a special place in myths. They weren't gods, but it was hard to call them ordinary people either. Heroes were born on the border between two worlds and combined the strength of the gods with the weakness of humans. Through heroes, people learned to understand the gods. The gods were too distant and powerful. Heroes, however, doubted, feared, made mistakes, and made choices. This is precisely why their destinies seemed closer and more understandable. Hercules, Perseus, Theseus, and other heroes constantly encountered the will of the gods. Sometimes the gods helped them, Sometimes they tested them, and sometimes they simply watched without interfering. Myths showed that even the support of the gods doesn't relieve difficulties. The hero still had to move forward on his own. Take a step, make a decision, bear the consequences. The ancient Greeks saw an important point in this. The gods can show the way, but man must walk it. If you think about it, this feeling is familiar to everyone. There are always clues all around, but the choice remains ours. That's why stories about heroes have never lost their power. They reminded us that man is not powerless, even when the world seems too big. Fate occupied a special place in the myths of ancient Greece. It was considered a force before which both men and gods were equal. Even Zeus could not completely change what was predetermined. Fate was personified by the Moirai, three beings who spun the thread of life. One began it, another measured its length, and the third cut it at the right moment. It sounds grim, but for the ancient Greeks, there was order in this. The world was not chaotic. Each life had its place and its time. However, fate did not abolish choice. A person could act differently. They could go against the current or go with it. But consequences always mattered. Myths taught acceptance of limitations, not as a punishment, but as a part of existence. Awareness of finitude made every action important. Sometimes it seems that modern man struggles with fate more than ancient man. We want to control everything, to plan, to predict. But the myths gently reminded us, not everything depends on effort. And in this, there is not only fear, but also peace. With this, the third chapter comes to an end. The stories of the gods gradually become stories of man. Over time, people stop perceiving myths as a direct explanation of the world's structure. Science, new knowledge, and other ways of understanding reality emerged. But the stories themselves did not disappear. Myths continued to live on in stories, books, and people's thoughts, because they contained more than descriptions of gods and miracles. They contained questions that people always ask themselves. Why is the world structured this way? Why do some events occur unexpectedly, while others repeat themselves again and again? Why do people seek order even where it is difficult to find? When the ancient Greeks spoke of the gods, they weren't talking about distant beings. They spoke of forces they felt every day, about fear of the future, about hope for protection, about the desire to be heard. Myths helped us accept what cannot be changed, and at the same time, they reminded us that the choice is ultimately ours. Even if fate is stronger, our attitude toward it matters. That's why these stories haven't become outdated. They've ceased to be beliefs, but they remain experiences. Experiences passed down from generation to generation. Myths were never simple fairy tales. They didn't have a clear division between good and evil. Gods could help and punish. Heroes could make mistakes and win. This is how the ancient Greeks showed the complexity of life. The world isn't divided into right and wrong. It's made up of decisions and consequences. Listening to these stories today, it's easy to notice how similar they are to our reality. People still search for meaning, still fear losing control, and still hope that there's hidden order in chaos. Myths didn't offer comforting promises. They didn't say everything would be fine. They said life requires attention and mindfulness. This was their strength. They didn't distract from reality, but helped us cope with it. Sometimes it seems that's why such stories are best heard in silence, when there's no rush, when there's nowhere to go, when you can simply listen and let your thoughts flow freely. In such moments, myths cease to be ancient. They become personal. But there's another reason why myths endure. They don't require rushing. There's no need to memorize every detail or follow a fast-paced plot. They can be listened to in the background, letting the words simply pass through your mind. For ancient people, myths were part of everyday life. They were told in the evening after work, when the day was drawing to a close. At this time, a person feels especially tired and simultaneously yearns for meaning. Myths help to sum up the day. They reminded that difficulties and doubts have always existed, that fear of the future is nothing new, and that even the gods face things they couldn't fully control. Listening to such stories, a person felt less alone. Their experiences became part of something greater, part of a shared human history. This was the special power of myths. They didn't promise easy solutions, but they provided a sense of connection. Connections to the past, to other people, and to oneself. Sometimes this is precisely the feeling we miss most. Not answers, but the calm understanding that your thoughts and feelings are not unique, that they have been experienced before. Today, the myths of ancient Greece continue to resonate in a different world, a world where much can be explained with words and numbers. But even here, questions remain that have no simple answers. In moments like these, we turn to stories again, not to find truth, but to find silence, to slow down a little and look at our lives from a distance. If, while listening to this story, you have thoughts or images you'd like to share, please write about them in the comments. Sometimes a short message helps you understand yourself better. And if you found it calming and interesting to listen to, you can support this video by liking it. This helps such stories reach those who truly need them. Myths end, but their meaning remains. They remind us that the world has always been complex, that fear and hope walk hand in hand, and that the search for meaning is never in vain. Thank you for spending this time here. May the rest of the evening be peaceful, and may your thoughts slowly fade. This is where the story ends. Until the next story.